The borrowed horse beneath her was frothing at the mouth, its sides heaving with exhaustion, but Beatrice Lawson could not stop, not with the sound of hoofbeats still echoing somewhere behind her in the darkness. Snow fell in thick, wet flakes that melted against her flushed cheeks as she urged the animal forward through the mountain pass, her threadbare coat doing little to protect her from the January cold of 1883. She had stolen nothing but her own life when she fled Prescott 3 days ago, leaving behind the man who called himself her guardian, and the brothel he had tried to force her into after her father died with gambling debts that somehow became her burden to pay. The horse stumbled on the icy ground, and Beatrice felt her heart lurch with terror. If the animal went lame, she would be on foot in country she did not know, with winter closing in around her and men who would drag her back to a fate worse than death. The town of Chloride, Arizona, lay somewhere ahead according to the last signpost she had passed, though in this weather she could barely see 10 feet in front of her face. The snow was unusual for this part of the territory, but the elevation had brought them into the realm of winter storms that swept down from the mountains with brutal efficiency. She had been riding for hours when the horse finally refused to go any further. The animal planted its hooves, and no amount of coaxing or pleading would make it take another step. Beatrice slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her, and grabbed the reins to lead the exhausted creature forward on foot. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the snow in horizontal sheets that stung her exposed skin. Her fingers were numb inside her thin gloves, her feet like blocks of ice in her worn leather boots. The world had become nothing but white and cold in the burning in her lungs as she forced herself to keep moving. She did not know how long she walked, leading the horse through the blizzard, before she saw the faint glow of light ahead. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, a trick of her exhausted mind. But as she drew closer, the light resolved itself into the warm yellow squares of windows, a structure taking shape through the driving snow. It was a ranch house, sturdy and well-built, with a barn standing nearby like a dark shadow against the white. Beatrice stumbled toward it, her body moving on instinct alone. She had nearly reached the porch when her legs finally gave out and she fell forward into the snow, the reins slipping from her frozen fingers. The horse snorted and shook its head, snow flying from its mane. She tried to push herself up, but her arms would not cooperate. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she could barely feel anything anymore. Through the haze of encroaching darkness, she heard the sound of a door opening, then heavy footsteps crunching through the snow toward her. Strong hands gripped her shoulders and turned her over. She found herself looking up into a face that seemed carved from the landscape itself, all hard planes and sharp angles, with eyes the color of storm clouds watching her with intense concern. The man was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. "What in God's name are you doing out in this weather?" His voice was deep and rough, edged with alarm. He did not wait for an answer, but scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing and strode toward the house. Beatrice tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical blow as he carried her inside and kicked the door shut behind them. He set her down in a chair near the pot-bellied stove that radiated blessed heat, then immediately began working at the buttons of her sodden coat. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes before you freeze to death," he said, his fingers quick and efficient. "Can you move your hands at all?" She managed a slight movement of her fingers and he nodded, satisfied. "Good. That is good. No frostbite yet if you can still move them." He pulled off her coat and tossed it aside, then knelt to remove her boots. His touch was impersonal, clinical almost, the touch of someone who had dealt with cold weather injuries before. When he had stripped away her wet outer layers, he wrapped her in a thick wool blanket and moved her chair even closer to the stove. Then he disappeared into another room and returned with an armful of dry clothes. "These belong to my sister," he said. "She is back east now, married to a banker. Put these on while I see to your horse." He left before she could respond, and Beatrice heard the door open and close again. Her fingers were beginning to thaw, sending painful prickles through them as sensation returned. She forced herself to stand and change into the dry clothes with clumsy movements. The dress was simple calico, well worn but clean, and several sizes too large for her slender frame. She rolled up the sleeves and tied the excess fabric at her waist with a bit of ribbon she found attached to the skirt. By the time the man returned, stamping snow from his boots, she was sitting by the stove again with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He carried a pot which he hung from a hook over the stove, then busied himself adding wood to the fire. "Your horse is in the barn," he said without looking at her. "Fed and watered and rubbed down. He will recover with rest." He straightened and finally turned to face her, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Now suppose you tell me who you are and why you were half dead in my front yard." Beatrice met his gaze, trying to read what she saw there. His expression was stern but not unkind, watchful but not threatening. She made a decision in that moment, one born of exhaustion and desperation and the bone-deep certainty that she had run as far as she could run alone. "My name is Beatrice Lawson," she said, her voice hoarse from the cold. "And I am running from men who mean to sell me." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Sell you? My father died 6 months ago. He owed money to a man named Cyrus Harding in Prescott. Harding said the debt was now mine to pay, and when I could not pay it with money, he decided I would pay it another way." She kept her voice steady though her hands trembled beneath the blanket. "He owns a brothel. He said I belonged to him now, that I would work there until the debt was cleared. But I knew that debt would never be cleared, that I would be trapped there until I was used up and thrown away." The man was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was chewing over her words. Finally he said, "Did he hurt you?" He tried. "I ran before he could do more than lock me in a room. I picked the lock with a hairpin and stole a horse and rode until I could not ride any more." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. "I will not go back. I would rather die out here in the snow than go back to that place." He studied her face for another long moment, then nodded once sharply. "You will not have to go back. My name is Daniel Stone. This is my ranch, the Double S, and you are under my protection now." He moved to the stove and stirred whatever was in the pot, releasing the rich smell of beef stew into the warm air. "Are you hungry?" Beatrice realized she was starving, that she had barely eaten in 3 days. "Yes," she said simply. Daniel ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing speed as her body recognized its desperate need for nourishment. He watched her eat without comment, then refilled her bowl when she had emptied it. "How old are you?" he asked. 21. "My birthday was last month." She paused with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "How old are you?" 26. He leaned against the wall, still watching her. "Can you cook, clean? Do you know anything about ranch work?" Beatrice set down the bowl. "I can cook and clean and sew and keep accounts. My mother taught me before she died. I do not know anything about ranching, but I can learn. I am not afraid of hard work." "Good, because if you stay here, you will work. I run this place alone since my foreman quit last fall, and I could use the help." His tone was matter-of-fact, businesslike. "You will have my sister's old room. You will earn your keep." And if anyone comes looking for you, your name is Beatrice Stone and you are my wife's cousin from back east, come to help while she is visiting her family. My wife does not exist, but the men who might come looking will not know that." Relief washed over her so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know what this means. I know what it means to need help and not have anywhere to turn." Daniel pushed off from the wall. "Get some rest. We will talk more in the morning." He showed her to a small bedroom with a narrow bed and a dresser and a window that looked out over the snow-covered landscape. Beatrice crawled under the quilts fully clothed and fell asleep almost instantly, her body surrendering to exhaustion now that she was finally, blessedly safe. She woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. Her body ached in every muscle and joint, but the bone-deep weariness had receded somewhat. She rose and splashed water from the pitcher on the dresser onto her face, then braided her long dark hair and went in search of Daniel. She found him in the kitchen, frying eggs and bacon in a cast iron skillet. He glanced at her when she entered but said nothing, just gestured toward the table. She sat and he placed a plate in front of her piled high with food, then poured her a cup of coffee so strong she could almost stand a spoon in it. "Thank you," she said, and he nodded. They ate in silence for several minutes before Daniel spoke. "The storm broke before dawn. The snow will melt off in a few days if we do not get another one, but it is January, so we probably will." He finished his coffee and refilled his cup. "I have cattle in the south pasture that need checking, fences to ride, a dozen other things that need doing. You can stay here and familiarize yourself with the house, figure out where everything is. There is food in the pantry and the root cellar. Chickens in the coop need feeding and their eggs collected. Can you handle that?" "Yes." Beatrice wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, savoring the warmth. "When do you want me to start?" "After you finish eating. No rush." He stood and carried his plate to the sink. "I will be back before dark." She watched him shrug into a heavy sheepskin coat and settle a worn hat on his head, then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Beatrice sat alone in the kitchen and let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in months. She was safe. She had found sanctuary in the most unexpected place, with a man who asked for nothing but honest work in exchange for his protection. She spent the day exploring the house, which was larger than it had seemed the night before. Besides the kitchen and the 2 bedrooms, there was a sitting room with a fireplace and shelves lined with books, and a small office where Daniel apparently kept his ranch records. Everything was neat, but had the slightly dusty, unlived-in quality of a place kept by someone who was too busy to worry about such things. Beatrice found cleaning supplies and set to work, scrubbing and dusting and sweeping until the house gleamed. She fed the chickens and collected nearly 2 dozen eggs, marveling at the simple pleasure of such a mundane task. In Prescott, after her father died, she had been kept like a prisoner in Harding's house, locked in a room with nothing to do but wait and fear what was coming. She made bread, kneading the dough with fierce concentration, and had it rising by the fire when Daniel returned as the sun was setting. He stomped snow from his boots and hung up his coat, then stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and looked around with an expression of surprise. "You have been busy," he said. "I told you I was not afraid of hard work." Beatrice turned from the stove where she was preparing dinner. "I hope you like stew. I found potatoes and carrots and onions in the root cellar, and there was beef left from last night. I like anything I do not have to cook myself." Daniel washed his hands at the pump and sat at the table, which she had set with plates and silverware. "The house has not been this clean since my sister left 2 years ago." They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Daniel would rise before dawn and tend to the animals, and the endless work of keeping the ranch running, while Beatrice managed the house and cooked and slowly began to relax the constant vigilance that had kept her spine rigid with tension. He was a man of few words, but what he said he meant, and she learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders and the way he held his mouth. A week after her arrival, she was in the barn collecting eggs when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat and she froze, listening. Daniel was out riding the fence line and would not be back for hours. She set down the basket and moved to the barn door, peering out cautiously. 3 men sat on horseback in front of the house, and even from a distance she could see they were rough characters, the kind of men who made their living with guns and violence. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face, called out, "Hello, the house." Beatrice shrank back into the shadows of the barn, her mind racing. They could not be looking for her already, could they? Surely Harding would not send men all this way in winter, not when he had no idea which direction she had fled. The men dismounted and one of them tried the door of the house. Finding it unlocked, they went inside. Beatrice knew she should run, should take a horse and flee before they found her, but her legs would not cooperate. And besides, where would she go? She had nowhere left to run. She was still standing paralyzed with indecision when she heard another horse approaching at a gallop. Daniel appeared around the side of the house, taking in the scene at a glance. He dismounted and walked toward the house with his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "You fellows looking for something?" His voice carried clearly in the cold air. The 3 men came back out onto the porch. The leader grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Heard there was a ranch out here run by a man alone. Thought maybe he could use some help. I have all the help I need." Daniel's tone was flat, uninviting. "That's so." The man looked around pointedly. "Do not see anyone else here. My wife is in the house." The lie came easily to Daniel's lips. "And I do not need ranch hands. Move along." The scarred man's grin widened. "Wife, sure would like to meet her. It is only polite, seeing as how we rode all this way. She is not receiving visitors." Daniel's hand tightened on his gun. "I said move along." The tension stretched taut as a wire between them. Beatrice could see the men weighing their options, trying to decide if whatever they had planned was worth going up against an armed man on his own property. Finally, the leader shrugged and turned back to his horse. "No offense meant, friend. Just looking for work is all." He mounted and the other 2 followed suit. They rode off at an easy pace, but Beatrice noticed they kept looking back over their shoulders. Daniel waited until they were out of sight before striding to the barn. He found her standing just inside the door, her face pale. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes, I am sorry. I should have hidden better. I just froze and I could not think what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush. "You did fine. They did not see you." He looked in the direction the men had ridden. "But we need to be more careful." Those were not ranch hands looking for work. Those were the kind of men who rob isolated homesteads and worse. "You think they will come back?" "Maybe. Probably not tonight, but maybe." Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "Can you shoot a gun?" "No, my father never taught me." "Then I will teach you, starting tomorrow." He picked up the basket of eggs she had dropped. "Come on. Let us get back to the house." That night Beatrice lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howling around the eaves and jumping at every creak and groan of the settling house. She thought about the 3 men and the way they had looked at Daniel, calculating and mean. She thought about Cyrus Harding back in Prescott and whether he had sent men after her. She thought about Daniel, who had taken her in without question and who now stood between her and the dangers of the world. He was a good man, she had realized over the past week. Taciturn and rough around the edges, but fundamentally decent in a way that was rare in her experience. He worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, treated his animals with kindness, and had given her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to turn. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, noticing the way his hands moved with sure competence at whatever task he set them to. The way his rare smiles transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. She was still awake when she heard the faint sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the house. Her eyes flew open and she sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. A moment later she heard Daniel's door open and his footsteps moving quietly through the house. Beatrice slipped out of bed and opened her door a crack, peering out. She could see nothing in the darkness, but she heard Daniel's voice, low and dangerous. "I told you fellows to move along, and we decided we did not want to." That was the scarred man's voice, thick with malicious amusement. "Figured a man living out here all alone must have something worth taking. Plus we want to meet that wife you mentioned." "There are 3 of you and 1 of me," Daniel said calmly. "But I am the one holding the gun, and I am a damn good shot even in the dark. You want to test that?" Beatrice could hear the shuffle of feet, the creak of floorboards. Her hand moved to the door handle without conscious thought. If there were 3 of them, Daniel would need help even with a gun. She eased the door open and slipped out into the hallway, staying close to the wall. "Maybe we will just take our chances," the scarred man was saying. "After all, you cannot shoot all 3 of us before one of us gets to you. You willing to bet your life on that? Because I promise you will be the first one to die." The tension in Daniel's voice told Beatrice the situation was about to explode into violence. She moved into the kitchen and felt along the counter until her hand closed on the handle of the cast-iron skillet. It was heavy and solid, and she gripped it with both hands as she edged toward the doorway of the sitting room. She could see them now, silhouetted against the faint light from the banked fire. Daniel stood with his back to the hallway, his gun pointed at the 3 men who had spread out to flank him. The scarred man stood directly in front of him, still grinning that awful grin. "Last chance," Daniel said. "Turn around and walk out that door. You are bluffing. You are not going to shoot anyone." The scarred man took a step forward. Daniel pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, and the scarred man stumbled backward with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 men rushed forward and Daniel fired again, but in the chaos his shot went wide. One of the men slammed into him and they went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun skittering away across the floor. Beatrice did not think. She simply moved, raising the skillet and bringing it down with all her strength on the head of the man who was wrestling with Daniel. The impact rang through her arms and the man went limp. Daniel shoved him aside and rolled to his feet just as the 3rd man pulled a knife. "Enough." Beatrice's voice cracked like a whip across the room. She stood with the skillet raised, breathing hard, her eyes blazing. "The next person who moves gets the same treatment." The 3rd man looked between her and Daniel, then at his 2 companions, one bleeding and one unconscious. He backed slowly toward the door, his hands raised. We are going. Take your friends with you." Daniel retrieved his gun and kept it trained on the man. "And if I ever see any of you on my property again, I will not aim for the shoulder." The man dragged the unconscious one toward the door while the scarred man stumbled after them, still clutching his bleeding shoulder. They got the door open and hauled themselves out into the night, leaving a trail of blood across the floor. Daniel crossed to the door and barred it, then turned to Beatrice. She was still standing with the skillet raised, her whole body trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. He gently took the skillet from her hands and set it aside, then gripped her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. No, I am fine." She looked up at him, and suddenly the terror and adrenaline caught up with her and she started to shake in earnest. "I thought they were going to kill you." Hey, it is all right, we are safe." Daniel pulled her against his chest, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. "You did good. You probably saved my life." Beatrice pressed her face against his shirt, breathing in the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and something essentially male. She could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. His arms around her felt like the safest place in the world, and she did not want to move. Did not want this moment to end. They stood like that for a long time, neither of them speaking, before Daniel finally eased back. He kept his hands on her shoulders, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. "You are sure you are all right?" "Yes." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I was so scared. I know. I am sorry you had to go through that." He let his hands drop and stepped back, putting distance between them. "Get some rest. I will clean up here and board up the window they broke." Beatrice wanted to protest, wanted to stay with him, but she nodded and returned to her room. She lay awake for the rest of the night, listening to the sounds of him moving through the house, the hammer blows as he nailed boards over the broken window. When dawn finally came, she rose and dressed and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Daniel was already there, looking haggard and exhausted. He had not shaved and his shirt was stained with blood, though she did not think it was his own. He looked up when she entered and something passed between them, a recognition of shared danger survived, of trust earned. "Coffee?" she asked, and he nodded. They ate breakfast in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, comfortable and companionable rather than awkward. When they had finished, Daniel pushed back from the table. "Those men might come back with reinforcements. We need to be ready." He stood and beckoned for her to follow him. "Come on, time for your first shooting lesson." He took her out to a field behind the barn where he had set up a row of bottles on a fence rail. The air was crisp and cold, their breath making clouds in the morning light. Daniel pulled a revolver from his belt and showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "The most important thing is not to panic," he said, standing behind her and adjusting her grip. "Fear makes you sloppy. You need to breathe, aim, and shoot like you mean it." Beatrice was acutely aware of his proximity, the way his body curved around hers as he guided her hands. She forced herself to concentrate on what he was saying rather than the warmth of him at her back. She aimed at the nearest bottle and fired. The recoil jolted up her arm and the shot went wide, missing entirely. "Again," Daniel said patiently. She practiced until her arms ached and her ears rang from the gunfire, but by the end of the session she could hit the bottles more often than not. Daniel nodded with satisfaction. "You are a natural. Keep practicing and you will be able to hold your own if it comes to that." "I hope it does not come to that. So do I." He reloaded the gun and handed it to her. "But hoping is not the same as being prepared. Keep this with you from now on." The days that followed were tense, both of them constantly watching for signs of the men returning. But as a week passed, and then two with no further trouble, they began to relax. The snow melted as Daniel had predicted, and the landscape transformed from white to brown and gray, the winter grass brittle and dead-looking. Beatrice settled more fully into her role as keeper of the house and Daniel's partner in running the ranch. She learned to milk the cow, to churn butter, to help him doctor a sick calf. They worked side by side mending fences and repairing the roof of the chicken coop, and she found herself enjoying the physical labor, the way it tired her body and quieted her mind. She also found herself noticing things about Daniel that had nothing to do with work. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he handled the tools of his trade, the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine when she managed to coax it from him. She would catch herself staring at him across the dinner table and have to look away quickly before he noticed. It was on one of these evenings in late February, nearly 2 months after her arrival, that Daniel broke the comfortable silence between them. "Tell me about your life before your father died." Beatrice set down her fork, surprised by the question. He rarely asked about her past, seeming to understand that it was painful territory. "What do you want to know? Anything you want to tell me?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression open and curious in a way it rarely was. She thought for a moment, sorting through memories. "My mother died when I was 12. Influenza. After that it was just my father and me. He was a clerk in a mining office, good with numbers. We had a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. I kept house for him and he taught me to read and write and keep accounts." She smiled sadly. "He was a good man when he was sober, but after my mother died he started drinking and the drinking led to gambling. By the time he died he had lost everything, including the house. I am sorry." Daniel's voice was gentle. "That must have been hard." "It was, but I survived it. I am surviving this." She met his eyes across the table. "Thanks to you, you would have survived without me. You are stronger than you know." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "I should tell you something too, about why I helped you." Beatrice followed him to the sink, picking up a towel to dry as he washed. "You do not have to explain. You are a good man, that is reason enough." "Maybe. But there is more to it than that." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling in the soapy water. "I had a younger sister, Emily, the one whose clothes you are wearing. She left 2 years ago to marry that banker I mentioned, but before that she lived here with me after our parents died. This was their ranch originally. They died in a wagon accident when I was 20 and Emily was 16. He paused, staring out the window into the darkness. "For a while after they died, Emily was lost, grieving. A man came around, older fellow, smooth talker. He courted her, and I did not think anything of it at first. But then I found out he was married, that he was just using her, lying to her. When I confronted him, he laughed in my face and said Emily was old enough to make her own choices." Beatrice heard the anger in his voice, old but still sharp. "What did you do?" "I ran him off the property and told Emily the truth. She did not believe me at first, but eventually she saw him for what he was. It broke her heart." Daniel turned to look at Beatrice. "When you showed up that night, half frozen and running from men who wanted to use you, I saw Emily. I saw the person I wished I could have been for her when she needed it most. Someone who would help without asking questions, without judging. Daniel." Beatrice reached out and touched his arm. "You saved your sister, you protected her. That is what matters. I almost did not. I almost let that bastard ruin her because I trusted the wrong person." His jaw tightened. "I will not make that mistake again. Anyone who threatens you threatens me, and I protect what is mine." The intensity in his words made Beatrice's breath catch. She looked up at him and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something fierce and possessive and tender all at once. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an electricity she had never felt before. "Beatrice," Daniel said softly, and the way he said her name made her heart skip. "Yes." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I need you to know something. You are safe here. Not just because I said you could stay, but because I want you here. Because this place is better with you in it. I am better with you in it. Daniel." Her voice came out breathless. "I feel the same way. You have given me so much more than just safety. You have given me a life again, a purpose. I do not know what I would have done without you." He cupped her face in both hands, tilting it up toward his. "May I kiss you?" she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Daniel leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first and then with increasing passion as she responded. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed herself against him, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was falling, spinning, coming alive in ways she had not known were possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said roughly. "Hell, I think I have been falling since the night you showed up in my yard with snow in your hair and fire in your eyes. I love you too." The words came easily because they were true, because she had been carrying them in her heart for weeks now without realizing it. "I think I started loving you the moment you wrapped me in that blanket and gave me shelter without asking for anything in return." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly if you will let me. I want to marry you if you will have me." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, yes to all of it. They stood in the kitchen holding each other, swaying slightly, neither wanting to let go. Finally, Daniel said, "We should probably get some sleep, but I want you to know you are not alone anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Beatrice agreed. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness. Daniel courted her with a single-minded determination that was both endearing and overwhelming. He picked wildflowers for her when he found them growing in sheltered spots. He carved her a small wooden bird that she treasured more than gold. He taught her to ride properly, not the desperate flight she had made to reach his ranch, but the easy confidence of someone who belonged in the saddle. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their histories and dreams and fears. She learned that he had wanted to be a school teacher when he was young, but had given up that dream when his parents died, and he inherited the ranch. He learned that she had always wanted to see the ocean, to stand on a beach and watch the waves roll in endlessly. "Maybe someday we will," Daniel said, pulling her close as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Maybe when the ranch is doing well enough to afford a manager for a few weeks, we will take a trip to California and I will show you the Pacific." "I would like that." Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder. "But I am happy here too. This feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." "That is because it is home now, your home." Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I was thinking, if you are agreeable, we could get married in April. That would give us time to get word to Emily so she can come if she wants, and to have the circuit preacher come through." "April sounds perfect." Beatrice smiled up at him. "That will give me time to make a proper dress. I want to look nice for our wedding. You could wear a flour sack, and you would be the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." But Daniel said it with such sincerity that she believed him. They made plans and dreamed and grew ever closer as winter gave way to the first tentative hints of spring. The grass began to green up, and the cattle, which had survived the winter in good shape, started to put on weight. Daniel hired 2 ranch hands from town, brothers named Jack and Tom Meredith, to help with the spring roundup and the expansion he was planning. Beatrice liked the brothers immediately. They were hardworking and cheerful in their early 20s, and they treated her with easy respect. She cooked for them and mended their clothes, and they repaid her by treating Daniel's ranch as though it were their own, working from dawn to dusk without complaint. It was Jack who brought the news in mid-March, riding in from town with his face grim. He found Daniel and Beatrice in the barn, where they were checking on a mare about to foal, and dismounted quickly. "Boss, we might have a problem," Jack said without preamble. "I was in town picking up supplies and I heard some men in the saloon talking. 3 men, rough-looking fellows. One of them had his arm in a sling. They were asking questions about ranches in the area, specifically any run by a man and his wife. Beatrice felt her blood run cold. Daniel's expression went hard as stone. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I do not know them and I do not talk to strangers about my employer's business." Jack shifted his weight. "But other people might not be so careful. If they are looking for you, they will find you eventually." "Let them come." Daniel's voice was flat and dangerous. "This time I will be ready." Beatrice touched his arm. "Daniel, maybe we should go to the sheriff. Tell him what happened." "The sheriff in Chloride is a good man, but he is one man in a territory full of outlaws and drifters. By the time he could do anything, it would be too late." Daniel looked at Jack. "How many men were there?" "Just the 3 I saw. But that does not mean there are not more." "All right. Here is what we are going to do. Jack, you and Tom take turns keeping watch at night. Beatrice, you keep that gun on you at all times. I am going to talk to some of the other ranchers, see if any of them have had trouble with these men." Daniel's jaw set in a hard line. "And if they come here, we will be ready for them." The next few days were tense with waiting. Beatrice went about her work with the revolver tucked into the waistband of her skirt, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of riders. Daniel and the Meredith brothers prepared defenses, reinforcing the doors and windows, positioning rifles at strategic points around the house and barn. The attack came on a moonless night 3 days after Jack's warning. Beatrice was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when she heard Tom's shout from the barn. "Riders coming in fast." Daniel was out the door instantly, rifle in hand, with Beatrice right behind him. She could see the shapes of men on horseback, at least 6 of them, thundering toward the house with guns drawn. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she raised her own weapon. The riders opened fire, and bullets thudded into the walls of the house. Daniel dropped to one knee and returned fire with deadly accuracy. One of the riders cried out and fell from his saddle. The others wheeled their horses and charged again. Beatrice fired, aiming carefully like Daniel had taught her. She saw one of the men jerk in his saddle and pull up, clutching his side. Jack and Tom had positioned themselves in the barn loft and were shooting from there, creating a crossfire that made the attackers hesitate. "Give us the girl and we will leave," someone shouted from the darkness. Beatrice recognized the voice of the scarred man, the one Daniel had shot in the shoulder. "This does not concern you, Cowboy. Just hand her over." "Like hell I will," Daniel shouted back. "This is your last warning. Ride away now or I will kill every last one of you." The response was another volley of gunfire. Daniel shoved Beatrice toward the door. "Get inside," he ordered, but she shook her head. "I am not leaving you." "Damn it, Beatrice, I cannot protect you and fight them at the same time. Then I will protect myself." She raised her gun and fired at her rider, who was trying to circle around to their flank. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the man rethink his approach. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The attackers were numerous but poorly organized, and Daniel and his small group had the advantage of position and preparation. One by one, the attackers fell back, realizing they were not going to win this fight. Finally, the scarred man called out again. "This is not over. You hear me? We will be back, and next time we will burn you out." "I look forward to it," Daniel shouted. "Next time I will aim for your head instead of your shoulder." The riders retreated into the darkness, leaving 2 of their number lying motionless in the dirt of the yard. Daniel waited until he was sure they were truly gone before lowering his rifle. He turned to Beatrice, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." She was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her weak. "Are you?" "No." He pulled her against him hard, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "God, when I saw you standing there in the line of fire, I thought my heart would stop. I could not let you face them alone." Beatrice buried her face in his chest. "We are in this together, remember." Jack and Tom came running from the barn, both unharmed. They checked the fallen attackers and confirmed they were dead. Daniel sent Jack to town at first light to fetch the sheriff while Tom helped him drag the bodies away from the house. The sheriff, a weathered man named Bill Crawford, arrived by mid-morning with a deputy. He took statements from all of them and examined the bodies. "These are known outlaws," he said grimly. "Wanted for robbery and worse in 3 territories. You did the law a favor by putting them down." "What about the others?" Daniel asked. "The ones who got away, they threatened to come back." "I will put the word out, get some deputies patrolling this area more regularly." Crawford tipped his hat to Beatrice. "Madam, I am sorry you had to go through this. If you can give me a description of the man in Prescott who started all this trouble, I will look into it. Human trafficking is illegal, even if he claims you owe him a debt." Beatrice described Cyrus Harding in detail, and the sheriff wrote it all down. "I will contact the marshal in Prescott, see what can be done. In the meantime, you folks keep your eyes open and your guns close." He looked at Daniel. "You are a good man, Stone, taking this young lady in and protecting her. Not many would. She is not just any young lady. She is going to be my wife." Daniel put his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "And I will kill anyone who tries to take her from me." Crawford nodded with approval. "I can see that. Well, congratulations to you both. Now let us hope those outlaws have enough sense to stay away from here." But they did not come back. Days turned into weeks with no further sign of the attackers. Word came through the sheriff that the scarred man and his remaining companions had been arrested trying to rob a stage 2 territories over. Cyrus Harding, when confronted by the marshal in Prescott, claimed he had no idea what anyone was talking about, and that Beatrice Lawson had left his employ of her own free will. The marshal could not prove otherwise without Beatrice's testimony, and she had no intention of ever returning to Prescott. With the threat lifted, life returned to something approaching normal. April arrived with warm breezes and wildflowers carpeting the hills. Emily Stone arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, traveling with her husband Charles, a friendly, portly man who clearly adored her. Emily was delighted to meet Beatrice and immediately took her under her wing, helping her finish the wedding dress and sharing stories about growing up on the ranch with Daniel. "He has always been protective," Emily confided as they sat together sewing. "Even when we were children, he would get into fights with any boy who teased me. Our mother used to say he had the heart of a guardian angel and the temper of a bull." "That sounds like him." Beatrice smiled, thinking of Daniel. "I am grateful for his protection, but I am even more grateful for his love. He loves you very much. I can see it in the way he looks at you like you are the most precious thing in the world." Emily squeezed her hand. "I am so glad he found you. He has been alone too long." The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in mid-April with the circuit preacher officiating. The ceremony was held outdoors on a meadow overlooking the ranch, with wildflowers scattered at their feet and the mountains rising in the distance. Beatrice wore her handmade dress of white muslin trimmed with lace Emily had brought from back east. Daniel wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. They stood facing each other, holding hands as the preacher read the vows. When it came time for Daniel to speak, his voice was clear and strong. "I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life. You are my partner, my equal, my everything. Your future starts here with me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure it is a good one." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face as she made her own vows. "You gave me sanctuary when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I would never know it. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to build a life with you that honors everything we have overcome to be here." The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Daniel kissed her to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The Meredith brothers and neighbors from surrounding ranches, and Emily and Charles. They celebrated with a feast Beatrice had spent days preparing, with music provided by a rancher who played the fiddle and dancing that went on until the stars came out. That night, in the room that was now theirs together, Daniel undressed his wife with gentle hands and showed her all the tenderness and passion he had been holding back during their courtship. They came together with breathless intensity, learning the geography of each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and sighs and gasps of delight. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets with Beatrice curled against his side, Daniel traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I meant what I said in my vows," he murmured. "Your future starts here. No more running, no more fear, just us building something good together." "I know." Beatrice pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his steadily beating heart. "I finally feel like I am home, like I belong somewhere. With you." They built that life together over the months and years that followed. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a struggling operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Beatrice proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to maximize profit without sacrificing the welfare of the animals or the land. She also proved to be tougher than anyone, including herself, had realized. When a neighboring rancher tried to cheat them on a cattle sale, she confronted him in front of witnesses and threatened to take him to court. When drought threatened one summer, she organized the neighboring ranchers to share water resources and help each other through the hard times. She earned a reputation as a woman not to be trifled with, and Daniel could not have been prouder. They faced challenges, as all couples do. There were disagreements about how to run the ranch, how to spend money, whether to expand or consolidate. There were hard years when the cattle market crashed, and they had to tighten their belts. There were personal losses, including the death of Emily's husband Charles from a sudden heart attack that left Emily a widow at 30. Through it all, they faced everything together, just as they had promised. Daniel never made a major decision without consulting Beatrice, and she never doubted that his opinion was worth hearing. They were partners in the truest sense, each bringing their own strengths to the marriage and supporting each other through the weaknesses. In the spring of 1885, 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Daniel, worried about how another mouth to feed would affect the ranch finances, but his reaction was pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, then set her down gently and immediately started fussing over her. "You should not be doing heavy work anymore," he said seriously. "We will hire another woman to help with the house. You need to rest and take care of yourself and the baby." "Daniel, I am pregnant, not an invalid." But Beatrice was touched by his concern. "I will be careful, I promise. But I am not going to stop living my life just because I am carrying a child." Their son was born in January of 1886, on a cold, clear morning with Emily in attendance to help with the delivery. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the bright light and cold air. A healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's stormy gray eyes. They named him James, after Daniel's father, and from the moment Daniel held his son for the first time, Beatrice knew their family was complete. Watching her husband with their baby, seeing the wonder and love on his face as he cradled the tiny form against his broad chest, Beatrice felt a rush of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She had run from her past through a blizzard with nothing but hope and determination, and she had found not just safety but joy. She had found love and partnership, and a future that stretched out before her bright with promise. James was followed by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Rose for the wildflowers that bloomed on the hills every spring. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, but she inherited her father's stubborn determination. From the time she could walk, she followed Daniel everywhere, insisting on helping with ranch work even when she was far too small to be any real help. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. The Double S Ranch became known throughout the territory for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Daniel and Beatrice were respected members of the community, often called upon to mediate disputes or organize community projects. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides and windows that looked out over the land they had tamed together. Jack and Tom Meredith remained with them through all those years, becoming more like family than employees. Jack eventually married a schoolteacher from town and built a house on ranch property, while Tom surprised everyone by falling in love with and marrying Emily when she came to visit 2 years after her husband's death. The expanded family celebrated holidays and birthdays together, their children growing up as close as siblings. On a warm evening in late May of 1895, Beatrice sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She was 43 now, with threads of silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but she still moved with the grace and energy of a younger woman. Daniel sat beside her in the rocking chair he had built, his own hair more gray than dark now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. James, now 9 years old, was in the barn helping Jack with the evening chores. Rose, 7, was inside setting the table for dinner. From where they sat, Beatrice and Daniel could hear her singing, her clear voice drifting through the open windows. "You ever think about that night?" Beatrice asked quietly. "The night I showed up here more dead than alive." Daniel reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. "All the time. Best night of my life, even if I did not know it then. I was so afraid." Beatrice stared out at the horizon, remembering. "I thought I had reached the end, that I had nowhere else to run. And then you were there, and you gave me everything I had lost. Safety, purpose, love. You gave me just as much." Daniel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions of living. You reminded me what it means to truly live, to have something worth protecting, worth building." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, fleeing through the snow with terror at her heels. She thought about all the roads that had led her to this porch, this moment, this man. And she thought about the future still stretching ahead of them, their children growing and the ranch flourishing and more years to be spent side by side. "Your future starts here," Daniel had said to her that first night, though she had not heard him say it then. He had saved those words for later, for their wedding day, and they had become a touchstone for their marriage. A reminder that no matter what had come before, they were building something new together. And what a future they had built. Not perfect, never easy, but rich with love and purpose and the deep satisfaction of work well done. The ranch that had been Daniel's burden had become their shared triumph. The love that had begun in desperate circumstances had deepened into something unshakable, tested by time and hardship, and emerged stronger for it. Rose came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner is ready, Mama. Papa, James says the new colt is walking better today." "That is good news." Daniel stood and stretched, his joints popping. "Come on, Bea, let us go eat before it gets cold." Beatrice let him pull her to her feet, and they followed their daughter inside to the warm, lamp-lit kitchen where the table was set and waiting. James came in from the barn with dirt on his knees and joy on his face, already talking a mile a minute about what he and Jack had accomplished. They sat down together, the four of them, and joined hands while Daniel said grace. Beatrice looked around the table at her family, at the life they had created through determination and love and sheer stubborn refusal to give up, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had run from her past through a blizzard, stealing a horse and her own freedom in one desperate act. She had collapsed in the snow outside a stranger's door, certain she had reached the end of her road. And instead, she had found the beginning of everything that mattered. The cowboy had caught her, and her future had indeed started there, on that cold January night when snow fell and the world seemed intent on swallowing her whole. But she had survived, and more than survived, she had thrived. They both had together. And as they ate dinner and laughed at James's stories and discussed plans for the next day's work, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about the path that had brought her here. Not the pain, not the fear, not the desperate flight through the snow. Because all of it, every moment of struggle and terror and uncertainty, had led her to this table, this family, this love. She reached under the table and squeezed Daniel's hand, and he squeezed back, his eyes meeting hers with perfect understanding. They had both been lost once in their own ways. And they had found each other, and in finding each other they had found themselves. The future they had built together stretched on still, full of promise and possibility. Their children would grow and have children of their own. The ranch would pass to the next generation. But the foundation they had laid, the love they had forged in the crucible of adversity, would endure. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel and Beatrice stood together on their porch looking up at the stars scattered across the endless Arizona sky. His arm was around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, and they swayed gently to music only they could hear. "I love you," Daniel murmured into her hair. "More now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. I love you too." Beatrice turned in his arms to face him, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips. "Thank you for catching me when I ran. Thank you for showing me that running towards something is better than running away." We ran toward each other. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "And we will keep running that direction for the rest of our lives." They went inside together, closing the door on the night, and retired to the bedroom they had shared for 12 years. They made love with the ease of long practice and deep familiarity, taking their time to bring each other pleasure, whispering words of love and devotion in the darkness. Afterward, Beatrice lay with her head on Daniel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt completely, utterly content. She had everything she had ever wanted and many things she had not known to want. She had love and security and purpose and family. She had a partner who saw her as his equal and a home that was truly hers. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joy and sorrow as years always do. They celebrated James's graduation from school and his decision to stay on the ranch and learn the business from his father. They watched Rose grow into a confident young woman who shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a doctor, and then actually following through, studying in San Francisco and returning to open a practice in Chloride. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market crashes and personal losses. Daniel's sister Emily passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 58, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Tom Meredith followed her a year later, his heart broken by the loss of his beloved wife. Jack stayed on at the ranch until he was too old to work, then retired to live with his daughter in town, visiting often to sit on the porch and swap stories with Daniel about the old days. Through it all, through more than 30 years of marriage, Daniel and Beatrice remained devoted to each other. They had their disagreements, their frustrations, their moments of anger or hurt. But beneath it all was a foundation of love and respect so deep and strong that nothing could shake it. On a crisp autumn day in 1913, Daniel collapsed while working in the south pasture. James and 2 hired hands got him back to the house and sent for Rose, who came immediately from town. She examined her father with professional competence masking deep personal fear, then pulled Beatrice aside to deliver the news they had both been dreading. "His heart is failing, Mama. I can make him comfortable, but there is nothing more I can do." Rose's voice broke. "I am so sorry." Beatrice felt the world tilt beneath her feet, but she forced herself to stay upright, stay strong. She nodded and squeezed her daughter's hand. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week or 2 if we are lucky. Then we will make them good days." Beatrice squared her shoulders and went to sit with her husband. Daniel lay in their bed, his face gray with pain but his eyes clear and aware. He reached for her hand and she took it, settling into the chair Rose had placed beside the bed. "I heard," he said softly. "I am sorry, B. Do not you dare apologize." Her voice was fierce. "You gave me 30 years of love and happiness. You have nothing to be sorry for." "I had hoped for more, had hoped to see grandchildren grown, maybe even great-grandchildren." He smiled weakly. "I had hoped to grow old and cranky together, driving everyone crazy with our bickering. We did grow old together, and we were never cranky." Beatrice blinked back tears. "Daniel Stone, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. From the moment you pulled me out of that snowstorm until this very second, you have been my partner, my love, my home. I do not regret a single moment of our life together." "Neither do I." Daniel's grip on her hand tightened. "Promise me something. Promise me you will keep living after I am gone. Keep running the ranch. Keep being involved in the community. Keep filling your days with purpose and joy. Do not mourn me so long that you forget to live." I promised to try. It was the best she could offer, and they both knew it. Daniel lingered for 10 days, surrounded by family and friends who came to pay their respects and say goodbye. James rarely left his father's side, soaking up every word of advice and wisdom Daniel had to offer about running the ranch and being a good man. Rose sat with him in the evenings, reading aloud from his favorite books or just holding his hand in comfortable silence. But it was Beatrice who was with him at the end, in the quiet hours before dawn when the world was still and peaceful. She felt the change in his breathing and knew the moment had come. She climbed into the bed beside him and gathered him into her arms, cradling his head against her breast. "I am here," she whispered. "I am right here with you. You can let go now. Your future starts here, my love, in whatever comes next. And someday I will follow, and we will be together again." Daniel's eyes opened one last time, finding hers in the dim light. He smiled, and she saw in that smile everything they had been to each other, everything they had built and survived and celebrated. "I love you," he breathed. "Always." "Always," she echoed and held him as his breathing slowed and stopped and he slipped away from her into whatever lay beyond. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that left Beatrice hollow and aching. She moved through the funeral like a sleepwalker, accepting condolences and making arrangements with a numbness that terrified her children. But slowly, day by day, she began to remember her promise. She began to live again, not with the same joy and vitality she had known when Daniel was alive, but with purpose and determination. She stayed involved in running the ranch, working alongside James and teaching him everything Daniel had taught her. She continued her community work, organizing relief efforts when neighbors faced hardship and advocating for better schools and medical care in the territory. She spent time with her grandchildren, 5 of them now, telling them stories about their grandfather and the ranch, and the night long ago when their grandmother had run through a snowstorm and found love. She lived for 20 more years after Daniel's death, passing away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1933 at the age of 81. She was buried beside Daniel on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, beneath a simple headstone that read, Beatrice Lawson Stone. Beloved wife, mother, and friend, her future started here. The Double S Ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The story of Daniel and Beatrice became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder of where they had come from and what love and determination could accomplish. And on cold winter nights when snow fell across the Arizona hills, it was said you could sometimes see 2 figures standing together on the porch of the old ranch house, arms around each other, looking out over the land they had loved. Just a glimpse, just a moment, and then they would fade like morning mist. But those who saw them always came away feeling blessed, touched by a love so strong it had transcended even death. For Beatrice had run from her, passed through a snowstorm, desperate and terrified and certain she had reached the end of her road. And a cowboy had caught her and given her everything she had lost and so much more. He had given her a future that stretched bright and full across 30 years of partnership and love. And when that future ended, he had left her with memories rich enough to sustain her through 2 more decades of living. Their story was one of resilience and hope, of 2 broken people finding each other and building something beautiful from the wreckage of their individual pasts. It was a story of the American West in all its harsh beauty and endless possibility. It was a story of love in its truest, deepest sense, the kind of love that weathers any storm and endures beyond the grave. And it all began with snow falling as she ran from her past, and a cowboy who caught her and said, in word and deed if not quite in those exact words that first night, "Your future starts here." A future they built together, one day at a time, one challenge overcome at a time, one moment of love and connection at a time. It was a future worth running toward, worth fighting for, worth living fully and completely until the very end. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A life well lived, a love fully realized, and the knowledge that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their legacy. The snow had fallen as she ran from her past. The cowboy had caught her, and together they had created a future neither of them could have imagined in that desperate, frozen moment when their lives first intersected. A future filled with love and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. A future that became a legacy, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of love to transform and redeem and heal. And so their story ended where it had begun, in the wild territory of Arizona, on a ranch carved out of harsh land through determination and sweat. But it was not really an ending at all. It was a continuation, a legacy living on in the people they had raised and the land they had tended and the love they had shared so completely that it still echoed through the years long after they were gone. The future had indeed started there, on that cold January night in 1883. And it continued still, generation after generation, a testament to 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful together in the light.